I've been a member of this community for about 20 years, as well as my husband Stott, who is an unofficial member. He sends his regards from somewhere over the Midwest as he flies back to Arlington, Virginia, which is mostly where we're living temporarily these days. And Mark is up at Santa Barbara finishing his math degree and making future plans. And I get to speak to you today because Paul designated this Sunday Epiphany Sunday and then left town. He needed a break after Christmas. And he also said, and I'm not telling any tales because he posted it on Facebook, he said that he had an epiphany, that he has nothing to say about Epiphany. I, on the other hand, have lots to say about Epiphany. How long do you have? Yeah, and in fact, I have so much to say about Epiphany that I have to apologize to these guys up on the altar here because I do not have time to talk about them. I'm going to talk about a present day Epiphany. First, just a little background. Epiphany comes from the Greek. The roots of the word are shining on, as in God shining on us, breaking through to our mundane reality with some kind of epiphany. So a star is a wonderful symbol of epiphany. And for those magi in the story, that was their epiphany, their wake-up call. But that story of the wise men was not the first epiphany story. The first liturgy of Epiphany that we have a record of dates back to the 4th century. And the readings were Jesus' baptism and or Jesus' birth, because the sacred is appearing in the world. Get it? How that works? And, epiphanies don't happen just once. They can happen all year long. But the official date is January 6th, in case you're keeping track. And epiphanies can be hard to see, especially for us modern people who are a bit skeptical. You will never record an epiphany on your cell phone. But when someone says, "Now I see what really matters," they have had an epiphany. When someone says, "Now I know how I want to live," they've had an epiphany. So I'm going to tell you about a present-day epiphany. Once upon a time, a child began asking questions, as children do, about God. Where is God in the world? How do we see God? How do we know what we know about God? And what does God do anyway? When she was very young, I think she knew. She basked in her parents' love, and she didn't imagine herself separate from the world or from God. But as she grew, that first shine faded. She missed it, though she didn't remember exactly what it was that she missed. The memory of it haunted her like a phantom limb. This child went to church, but she didn't discover God there. She listened to the preacher, who might have been speaking for God, but what she heard was, "Be good. Just be good. Be good." And the problem was that she wasn't very good at being good. She tried, and it was quite discouraging. This child kept an eye on the people she knew who claimed to be working for God, and she saw that they worked very hard and did wonderful things, trying to make the world a little more orderly and fair and loving. And she supposed that this was a good thing, but she wondered, where is God in that exactly? What's God doing about God's work? And it seemed to her that working for God without God was kind of a lonely business. Now, she observed that some people claim to have a direct line to God, And for most of these people, God was a mighty king, always in control, determining the course of earthquakes, the rise and fall of nations, demanding obedience, promising reward, threatening punishment. People who like this kind of God seem to be relieved that someone was really in charge. But this kind of God didn't appeal to her very much, didn't seem very loving or merciful. And the people who believed in this kind of God usually had some human leader who spoke for that God and told them what to do. And naturally, that human leader became very powerful himself, and it was always a man, of course. But how did he get to be so special that God only talked to him? If God was going to give orders, he was going to have to do it to her personally. She was just that stubborn. Nobody close to her seemed to believe in that kind of a God anyway. Quite the opposite. They talked about a mighty God on Sunday morning, but it seemed like nobody had seen that might in action for quite some time. The miracles in the Bible, well, those were from biblical times, or maybe they were superstitions that people had back in biblical times. She heard of a clockmaker God who had created the world and wound it up and set it running on its own and was waiting in heaven to collect us after we die. She realized that whatever these people said on Sunday morning, this appeared to be the kind of God they actually expected. A far away kind of God. And she decided that if God was going to ignore her, she was going to ignore God. So she put her energy different places. She started asking questions of the natural world. This was fun. This was science. Studying the natural world filled her with wonder as she delighted in the beauty and patterns of atoms and crystals. She felt as if she had been given a wonderful gift. But where was the giver? She didn't know. Eventually, the child became a woman, and she still felt something missing. She went back to church, not the same church of her childhood. She brought all her questions with her, and she discovered the seminary bookstore. Fun. There she had her first epiphany. A writer named Matthew Fox told her of something called panentheism. Not pantheism, all is God. She was quite sure that she was not God, despite what the Hindus and the New Agers tried to tell her. Rather, panentheism. All is in God, and God is in all things. Epiphany, of course. Some of her friends objected to this panentheism thing she started spouting about. I mean, is God the Force, like in Star Wars? To them, God was a person, not a force. Actually, she didn't have much trouble imagining that God could be both at the same time. She had met much stranger things in quantum mechanics. Memories came of all the times when she was lost in the beauty and wonder of the natural world, and of those precious times when she touched love. No separation. There is no separation. It finally got through to her. God is not far away. God is right here, everywhere, shining in and through every bit of reality, but we don't know how to see it most of the time. She liked how the poet Kabir said it. I laugh when I hear the fish in the water is thirsty. She heard that old story of Helen Keller and Annie Sullivan again, and she heard it in a new way this time. God is like Annie Sullivan, and we are like Helen Keller. Annie is trying to get through to Helen, trying to communicate. But Helen is deaf and blind, and she cannot understand. The world is full of light and sound, but she can't perceive any of it. Annie is holding Helen's hand and spelling out the letters in sign language into her hand, but Helen doesn't understand. Helen doesn't even realize that Annie is trying to speak to her. But then, Epiphany, Helen gets it, and there's laughter and joy, and a whole new world opens up because Helen realizes she's not alone. The woman still wondered, though, what exactly does God do? Besides being the force that set the atoms in motion and holds everything together in wonderful complexity. Well, she had been listening to the teachings of Jesus for a while by that time, and she decided that what God does is God invites. Jesus was busy inviting, right? Inviting people into the kingdom of God. That place where people are in right relationship and get healed and transformed and know they are loved and know how to love and have a lot of dinner parties. She was determined to accept the invitation and live in that kingdom. But she realized pretty quickly that she does it rather poorly. Much of the time, she wants to do things her own way, in the dark, you could say. Still, the light is always shining. All she has to do is turn toward it, accept the invitation, no matter how long she's been stumbling around in the dark. The story of Jesus' death and resurrection was never an easy story for that woman to hear. But now she hears it in a new way. It was a story of God's invitation and people refusing that invitation. And Jesus continuing to invite no matter what the cost. Shining love into hatred, shining hope into hell, shining life into death. So the cross is a powerful symbol for her, not to be used lightly. A symbol that God keeps inviting us no matter what. Frequently, this woman forgets in the moment what she knows very well. The presence of God is in every face, every leaf, every flower. She often imagines herself alone because she will not open herself to the wonder that surrounds her, the world aglow with God. Sometimes she imagines that God has nothing to say to her, when actually the problem is she's not listening. She occasionally gets herself into some pretty deep holes, but that's not all bad, because when she's in a deep enough hole, she needs that light to shine to find her way out. She goes looking for that light to shine. And she gets to help God to remind people that they are never alone, that the world is alive with wonder and possibility, even if our eyes aren't always tuned to see it, that God is here now, not just for the rare miracle, but inviting us, sustaining us, loving and creating all the time, no matter what. And she gets to invite people to reflect God's light in the world in the form of love, justice, hope, healing. You choose. There's one for every occasion. So, my friends, shine on.